This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We're brought to you by Prize Picks, coming at you late Friday afternoon. It's May 31st. And earlier this afternoon, we had Wolves exit interviews with both Chris Finch and Tim Conley, little Kyle Anderson and Jade McDaniels in there too. So we'll dig into some of what mostly Finch and Conley said to kind of wrap up the season with their exit interviews. We'll, of course, I'm sure, reflect on the series, the season as a whole. I got Britt Robson here with me. Britt, you wrote a little playoff for you've been up. You were at Target Center late last night. You must have been up early this morning.
Yeah, I think we all have been burning the candle at both ends for quite a while now.
But it's over. I mean, what is when I say that, the season's over, where does your head first go? Because I don't think it's like wrong to have your head first go to, Western Conference Finals season is a success, all those sort of, because that's obviously true. Or your head can go to, oh my God, what didn't happen in this series. I think both are fair to reflect on. Where does your head kind of go to first?
I think the people who say that they were a shot or two away from making it a 7-game series is something delusional.
Mm-hmm.
I thought Dallas was the better team pretty much 3/4 of the series.
Right.
And I thought they played more assured. They played their brand of basketball and imposed it on the Wolves much more than vice versa.
Right.
I thought that the Wolves were, and it was alluded to off and on today in varying degrees, some by the strenuousness of their denial of it, but they were emotionally and physically tired, I think, for most of this series. And Dallas was not. Specifically, the 230-pound point guard was having fun out there in that, that game last night. And I think that what I learned from that is that that weariness manifests itself in a lot of different ways. I mean, Finch was exasperated by how poorly they adhered to the game plan in the first 2 games. Mm-hmm. And I think what you saw there was, in addition to some physical hangover, some emotional hangover, he thought it had to do with a very emotional Game 7 win. I thought it had to do with the fact that beating Denver was always like the big goal of the Western Conference side of things. And I think just as Phoenix and Denver took the Wolves a little bit too lightly in the first 2 rounds, I thought the Wolves took Dallas too lightly and couldn't recover in time. Didn't really play. The quick answer to your question, let's do it that way instead, is that I am not at all ruining that they lost in 5 games. I thought it was an appropriate outcome, and they can take things away from that. One of the things I wrote today, it was kind of amazing to me to look at the way Luka's career and Ant's career has gone. No playoffs rookie year, first round exit, second and third year, conference finals with a 5-game loss in the finals, fourth year, and great expectations in the 5th year, which turned out to be totally erroneous. They fell on their face, even though they got Kyrie at the deadline. They tanked to get a pick. The pick turned out to be Lively, who was amazing, and they made 2 other deals that comprised a front court that totally wrecked the Wolves through most of the series. So I think that sets up 2 outcomes going forward. Nothing is promised. Everybody who's assuming that because they had something pretty special this year and that those players will be a little older, and for the most part, that's a good thing, that the Wolves are going to be right there again. And there's just so many examples of that not happening.
Right.
On the other hand, core pieces that are central to the enterprise, as Luka certainly was in Dallas, and Ant certainly seems to be here. If they continue to dedicate themselves and put in the work and get better. It may not be the same core around them when they ascend, but they will be much better for it. And I think that this is an important growth year for Ant, important growth year for Nas and Jade McDaniels. I don't know if they're going to be, Rudy's got 2 years left. Conley's got 2 years left. I don't know if they are legitimate championship contenders in that 2-year window.
Well, that's what's interesting about the Luka thing, right? Is 2 years ago, as you just said, very different roster construction that they had then versus now 2 years later when they ultimately do go to the finals. And yeah, it's just if the Wolves get back to here, it almost certainly will be a different roster construction, even if it's next season, or at least there's a possibility, a pretty good possibility that the roster looks different. So I think that's, and I get, in the moment, and particularly if you're Anthony Edwards and Nas Reed and Jade McDaniels, the guys we've talked to, when they talked of all of those guys said, we'll be right back. We'll be back here next year. Well, they haven't really gone through the crucible of a roster crunch for Nas Reed. He's been on the team for 5 seasons, Jade and Ant, and it is just kind of
they've been barging their way in rather than holding on to something and watching pieces shift.
But pieces shifting, I think, is just, and this is probably just important for like the fan base in general, is pieces shifting does not mean worse. It can, but it can also, like Dallas as an example, a reconfiguration can make it be better, can make it be more believable. And I think when I just reflect on this Wolves season, and not to take away from it at all, but there are elements of it, right, that were impressive, but maybe not believable in a sustainability standpoint. Or I don't know, maybe that's me just getting kind of caught up in the moment or the day after a loss or whatever. Obviously, the hot button topic with that is like the offense. How believable is it that this type of offense could bring you to an NBA finals? And that's where roster construction comes in, and changing stylistic, all those sort of things of what do you need to do to get back here, rather than the assumption that we will get back here. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly. And I think that it isn't, the pieces are greater. The pieces are greater than the sum of their parts, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. I think that, Rudy is a fine pick and roll roller, and Mike Conley is great on that action, and Cat is great as a matchup nightmare, and Ant obviously is tremendous on and off the ball. But Tim Conley, you have a team with Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Edwards, and Nas Reed on it. How are you not going to have a good offense? I can think of many ways. All of those guys have really have a lot of flaws in their offensive games. As great as those games are, they're all prone to turnovers. They are all prone to remembering how joyous it is to be peaking, and are constantly seeking that. I just think that you need the ballast of other teammates in the right proportion. And I do not disagree at all with what they did this year, which was the ballast was defense. The ballast was, we're going to ride Rudy in the middle, and then we're going to have Jade McDaniels and Anthony Edwards and Nikhil off the bench, and Kyle Anderson to some extent off the bench. All these people are great on-ball defenders, because Finch likes 2 things. He likes ball pressure on defense and ball movement on offense. Mm-hmm. The fastest way to get to the thing he likes best was ball pressure on defense this year, because Rudy bought into a different style. Yep. It was a ball pressure style rather than a rim protection style. He could still do rim protection. He had more versatility. When I asked Finch during the exit interviews today if he thought that they needed more offensive versatility akin to what they did in terms of diversification on defense, he was all for it. He wasn't very big with the specifics. And part of the reason for that is Cat and Rudy are limiting. It is not a versatile offense when those two are on the court at the same time.
Well, and so that's a great way to frame this. What was said repeatedly at exit interviews today by Tim Connolly and Kyle Anderson that I don't necessarily disagree with was Finch is an offensive genius.
Yes.
Right. Finch is an elite offensive coach, as many of us were asking about, offense.
Right.
And my question is, what proof do we have of that?
Exactly. Well, I mean, is he a great theorist, or is he a great? I mean, you can be a genius. Einstein was a genius, but he wasn't somebody who was. He was positing theories.
Right.
He wasn't putting products.
Sure.
And so Finch has a style that is basically play together. We see how those ways of playing together create synergies. Will build the offense around the flow of those synergies. That's, if I was to describe Finch's offense, that's what
Yes.
I would think it would be. And so what happens when the players themselves don't know the best flow?
Yeah.
And that is
what the
happened.
Synergies are.
And that's what happened this year. And as great, again, as Rudy and Kat and Ant and Nas and everybody are, they don't have that type of command of the team. Mike Conley does to some extent. You can enforce a Finchian model with Mike Conley enforcing it. But again, that's a step removed from what Finch really is idealizing. It's he wants everybody to know what to do because the flow is there. The blueprint is there to make the flow work right. You find your man, hit your man, get off the ball. If it's not there, get, score or pass, whatever, but keep things hopping. He talked about pace a lot. And obviously that's true. The reason they don't have a high pace is because they turn the ball over. And so what they're going to have to do if they are going to diversify and get to what Finch envisions is they're going to have to make the kinds of decisions that increase pace but don't turn the ball over. Right. And that's a tall order for this crew.
Yeah, it's so organizationally, again, Conley and Anderson and many of the players have talked about what Finch, can do offensively or what they think of him offensively. And, maybe the cynic goes, okay, well, of course they have to say that they have to say that that's his coach, or their coach. But because I've been thinking about this and, knowing a few other people around the league, I've asked them, what is your perception of Chris Finch, or what is the word of that? And that is the word, it is that Finch is special offensively in how he scripts and structures an offense, or the lack of structure he puts in an offense, kind of the combination of that. So, and now this is an assumption, we don't have no proof, but if that is true, then if we accept that as a truth, and then we think about the fact that they've had Finch as the coach for the last 2 seasons since they acquired Rudy Gobert, and this team has been 23rd and 17th in offense, what is it then? And that, to me, you have to look at personnel as the reason for that. And where this gets complicated is that personnel has empowered this team to be number one defensively, which is in and of itself is more important than being a top 10 offense, right? Like that delta. But there's something going on there that makes you, at least if you're Tim Connolly or whatever, anybody thinking about this team, analyzing it, makes you have to ask yourself, what about these pieces is not synergistic, diagnosing those, and then asking, can we make them synergistic? Mm-hmm. And, and we could go through this with Kat and Ant. We probably should, because Finch had an interesting anecdote on that. The presence of Rudy offensively, what that does for creating advantages with screening, but what that also does for disadvantaging you from a spacing standpoint. It's just, it's hard for me if we accept the truth that Finch knows what he's doing offensively, then those numbers don't line up. 23rd and 17th over the last 2 seasons.
I think it's a conscious decision. I mean, I think Finch understands that he is punting offense for defense. He said at the beginning of the season, we're going to be a defensive team. That's what's going to be our calling card. I think even though the whole thing has worked out wonderfully, and any cynics or critics of the Gobert trade they've lost the argument, and having been kind of on the fence for a while and then a cynic for a while, shown the error of my ways, I think I'm in a decent position to talk about this. But a motion offense that relies on ball movement without the ball, and organizing around things you do best in rhythm is not an offense that Rudy Gobert thrives in. And in fact, he hinders it because he doesn't have great hands. He doesn't have any finesse near the hoop. What they tried to do during the playoffs, and Rudy, again, to his credit, bought all in. When Rudy first came here and he would get an entry pass, his first inclination was to go to the hoop, and it was to be deliberate in going to the hoop. And throughout the Dallas series, and even a bit in Denver, and even some in Phoenix, I think it just got increasingly more common as the playoffs went on, though. He'd catch the ball and whirl to hit another guy.
Oh,
yeah, exactly.
As a pass, the pass.
Yeah, as a pass.
He got better at that.
He got better at that in terms of ball movement, but nobody took his shot seriously. And he could not take his shot seriously. He could not. I mean, he hit that one turnaround against the Nuggets that is now legend because of what a unicorn it was. But no team that scouts him is going to worry about him going to the hoop until they see that jab step. I mean, when has Rudy just whirled and immediately done a full-scale back to the basket all the way to a shot at the rim? You know, it just doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, I mean, they had the one on Luka last night, but you're right. They are few and far between.
And they don't go in very often, even when they happen.
And and that's why it's like, can you get deep enough to make the post move and finish with a dunk? You know, that's what he needs to be able to. And that's easier. It's hard to make a post move and finish with a dunk.
And this is all easily scouted. See, that's the thing. When you have a limited repertoire and you are on the floor a lot,
right?
And fast, silky ball movement is not literally a genetic part of your game, you're going to be hindered somewhat. And again,
but that's the part, the hindered part. I think, can we parse that a little bit? Because sure. It would be wrong to say unilaterally that Rudy hinders the offense, right? Because we do have
his numbers are strong.
Yes. I mean, so, but what it is his numbers are strong because he creates advantages with his screens and the attraction, that the gravity that he has as at the rim as a roller. That creates this big, let's give that 10 points of value.
Right.
The stuff that he isn't able to do when we're talking about being able to score outside of 2 feet or being in the dunker spot and getting the way subtracts some of that 10, 4 or 5 points of it. It's still Absolutely. +5. So that is, I think that's the right way to look at it. A lot of people just say your offense sucks if you have Rudy Gobert because of the minus. But they ignore not you, but you know that particularly has been out there.
Well, it's kind of like the great thing about both offense and defense is you build off your strengths. And so with Rudy, there are parts of construction that can't happen. You can't build in certain areas. You can't build baseline cuts. You can't build, you can do a lot of that old Flip Saunders, multiple dribble handoff weave that they do sometimes, but you can't do the beautiful game stuff, the stuff that the San Antonio did in its prime, and that you see even actually
I think you could if you had a full-on stylistic change and you started to play like Utah. I think
or
Utah had some of
Indiana.
that. Yeah, but Indiana does it with a floor spacing
with
big
speed.
that's
Exactly.
and speed. Like
Right.
I think you can play a pretty beautiful game of basketball with a non-shooting 5 today. You just need to have an offense that is scripted to do such, which would mean Ant would need to be a player who works really well in pick and roll with a rolling big. And that improved some this year because that was like a 1 out of 10.
Right.
Last season it got better. He started finding, him some, but I think that's the Ant synergy with Rudy and with Cat.
Right.
It again, not zeros, but
Right.
there's room to grow there. The question I think is how much growth can reasonably be expected, particularly when you're going against the clock a little bit here with Rudy's age, contract, the overall
Exactly
salary
what I was
of
going to
this
say.
whole
I
group.
mean, it depends. There are various ways to build. There are ways to build an offense within a season, doing this and then doing this.
Mhm.
Then we can work off that. But there are also ways to build like fairly long-term familiarity that gives you that stuff. I mean, Mike Conley and Kyle Anderson and surprisingly Jaden McDaniels have really good communication with Rudy and work well with him.
Mm-hmm.
And Cat, I mean, Cat does, but not in the context of when they're in their flow offense. It's
Right.
only when Cat sees him open and breaks the rhythm of it to get him a bucket, which nothing wrong with that. And Finch's offense is built for that. You can break it off if you're going to score. But but in terms of building something that is a beautiful thing, the Wolves do not have, for a offensive talent as phenomenal as Ant is, he's never been an efficient scorer, and Cat has always been a weirdly isolational scorer. I mean, it's not that he runs ISOs all the time, but that
it happens in independence.
It happens like the give and go. He sees the lane, and there it is. Swing is an open 3. There it is. It's part of the system, but it is not. Cat can't be the top scorer in that kind of Finch lineup, I think, because because he just simply isn't dynamic enough.
Right.
I mean, it's weird. He's a matchup nightmare, but it isn't like he doesn't have. He's no PJ Washington or something. He's got skills and he can do things, but he is not going to be somebody. He's not Lauri Markkanen or somebody, who can give you a little bit more than that and have it be in the rhythm. If Cat's in the rhythm more often than not, he's finishing a play with a bucket or a dime or a turnover. Right. He's not in the middle of things a lot.
I want to keep talking about Cat because obviously he talked post game last night about his future, but also I just want to talk about how he kind of folds into this greater offensive question. We'll grab our first break here to let you all know that today's show is brought to you by Autograph, and you can download the Autograph app for free in the App Store or the Google Play Store. What Autograph is it's an app that has team communities for all different sports, but obviously here we're focused on the Timberwolves community. And I think what I know you will find in the Timberwolves community is kind of all the Timberwolves content in one place, whether that comes from the team, the press conferences, those sort of things, but also writing out there about the off season, or my show is in there as well. So it's just kind of like a one-stop shop for you to consume Wolves content. We'd love for you to check out the Autograph app. Again, it's free. Use referral code Dane. Referral code DaneMoore to let them know that you came from us. And by consuming content there, you get these fan coins that allow you the opportunity to get memorabilia, ticket drops, all those sort of things. So just, again, free. Check out the Autograph app. Use referral code DaneMoore to let them know that you came from us. Today's show is also brought to you by Prize Picks. We're obviously been telling you about Prize Picks, talking about them in relation to the Wolves all season. But the NBA Finals, when do those start? Next Thursday? Is that?
Yeah.
Is a while? So you can take a look at the Boston and Dallas numbers that are set for that. Make a daily fantasy lineup, over the course of the week, kind of putting together as you learn or study this series a little bit more. They have a free square for Jason Tatum. If he scores a point, you get that square for free in your daily fantasy lineup. But something fun to dig into this summer, as for baseball or for the finals or whatever it might be. That's prizepicks.com, the PrizePicks app. You can use promo code Dane for a $100 sign up bonus. But let's keep talking about Cat here a little bit. And as we're talking about offense, we're talking about synergies. I think that's something that, as I reflect on this return period for Karl, and granted, he's coming off of a knee injury, right? And I don't want to say he was playing on one leg, but he was playing like he was coming back from an injury, and that impacted some of this too. But he lacked even some of the synergy I thought that he had pre-injury, just with Mike Conley and pick and pop game, or with Ant, or playing off of that. And in many ways, right, he tried to fit in to what Nas was doing in the starting lineup in Cat's absence, which again made some logical sense. It was the best the Wolves offense had been for any period of time that last month of the season. Karl tried to emulate some of that. And I think that's a credit. I think we all agreed that that's something he needed to do. But there was an element of it that I think the quickness of it, the decisiveness of it, was somewhat foreign to Karl, because that's not the way he's played for 8.5 seasons of his career up to that point. And I think a lot of the shooting woes in this series were about frustration, mental anguish, some of that sort of stuff. But I do think part of it was Karl trying to play a way that might have been good for the group, but was a little bit foreign for him. So I think I could spin that as a positive, that if Karl is back and you have more time to kind of emulate that, to play faster, as Finch has said today, as a necessary element of improving this offense. I think the hope would be, with an off season of knowing this is the way that you're going to need to play, that he would come back more ready to play that way, which a summer ago we were having the same conversation, but about the defensive side of the ball,
right?
And the things that he needed to do from a transition defense standpoint, from a being able to chase on the perimeter standpoint. I think you can hold some solace in the idea that Karl has continued to evolve his game. It is, and Kyle and I talked about this a little bit last night, it is a little bit more of a challenge, I would assume, when those changes and those evolutions need to happen on the offensive side of the floor, when he has been an elite offensive player, for 9 years in the NBA from a production and efficiency standpoint. How do you think that's going to go?
I think the interesting question is Cat's ceiling. Because for the longest time, Cat's ceiling was hindered by his need to belong to something bigger than himself. And he was kind of shut out from that. He's been a member of this team for 9 years, as he continually reminds us, and appropriately. But he's not been like the talisman, the leader, the grizzled vet, the guy who's been there all along. And he hasn't gotten the props of a 9-year veteran leading a team, because he is not necessarily a leader in the locker room. But I think he is no longer a awkward presence in the locker room. And for that, I credit the character players that Tim Connolly has gone out and gotten, who appropriately recognize that Cat is not a bad dude. The opposite is true. He's a really good dude. And what he just needs is to not feel like, he's walking around with PTSD from, all the stuff that's happened. And Ann has been brilliant at that. And I think that other players on the team have followed Ann's lead on that. And I think Cat knows it's genuine. And what that's all meant is that Cat will do what needs to be done to the best of his ability. And that's happened on defense to a stunning degree. The fact that Cat was more of a defensive positive than a defensive liability in the playoffs is like a reversal of fortune that, because defense is always such a weird thing to talk about, there's not a lot of stats for it, but his contribution to the first two series was enormous. He was in the right place at the right time with the right skill set. And just as we're talking about how maybe his skills don't really fit the kind of offense that we were just talking about, they did fit the defensive template that was needed to beat two quality teams in the first round of the playoffs. And that, again, that reinforcement of knowing in his bones that he was a defensive positive on the best defense in the NBA. I mean,
which is something, let's both raise our hands of like, did not think that was.
Oh, absolutely not.
So that's why I'm looking at this through the offensive and the adjustment standpoint of that sort of stuff.
He will try to do it. He will definitely.
He already did. He already did the Nas thing and already did try, which didn't work necessarily. But the point is, if you want to get there, he has to want to try to do it, and that's an important first step that I would bank on too. Yeah, and so then the question becomes, what are the other four players around him when you want to have? That's why Finch, I think, was talking about units and combos and different faces of the offense. Exactly how we put it. Yeah. And the versatility angle that I tried to make him put a fine point on. You never know whether or not he's just going, yeah, of course, if I'm not going to say we don't want to be more versatile, but I don't know how much his heart was in it. But I happen to think that it's important that you have different wrinkles on offense that you can give different teams. Sure. Just as defense was so important to have Rudy not be the dominant rim protector all the time, have him be a roamer, have it be a high wall, low man, whatever you're, have it be occasionally switching, not switching. And so on offense, if you can get that kind of flexibility, Cat is not an ultra flexible piece, but he is willing to be a piece. And if they can discover, and if Finch is the genius that everybody talks about, then Finch should be able to figure out how a willing talent like Cat can fit in a structure that is, again, follow your habits and will work the scheme around those habits. Let's see how that goes. Yeah, that is the challenge, right? And I think it's, and like Rudy, it's a high floor. It isn't like if it won't be a failure, it'll just not be great. Well, and this is where I think Conley comes in, right? Is you go, okay, and he has a belief in Finch to be able to solve problems, right? But the job, I think, of a president of basketball operations is to put the coach in the best position to be able to solve those problems. And there's high level elements of that, of trading Carl, or, making some sort of sweeping change to like the starting lineup or the core of it. There's also, smaller things. Do we need another secondary ball handler? Do you need, do you always need a Mike Conley on the floor next to Anthony Edwards? Those are the type of things that Connolly in the front office shapes so as to be able to be like, okay, here you go, Finch. Here's the booklet. make the most out of the booklet. We put it together, and obviously those two are working together. But this is where we're at now, and this is
Yes.
what starts in June, and you have the draft in 3 weeks, and you have free agency coming up, and trades, and some contract decisions with lesser players like, Kyle Anderson, top of the list. But just because there aren't free agents doesn't mean there isn't the opportunity to change, or maybe the need to change different things there. How do you think Conley will go about that challenge?
Well, I mentioned this in the gaggle of reporters, the beat writers after the thing, and it was universally a minority opinion. I think there's a decent chance that Slow-Mo comes back. I really do. And I know that I wouldn't have thought that way, except for everything about that confab this morning kind of pushed me in that direction. First of all, I know it's my own bias that money doesn't matter as much to me as it matters to other people, but quality of work has always been something that's very important to me. And I think some people are just wired that way. And you saw Jaden McDaniels when, anything changed, you're getting paid, you're having a kid. Nothing's changed. Whereas Kyle Anderson, my kid, is on the spectrum and he's doing really well in school. Mm-hmm. I have a coach here who knows I want the ball in my hands, and he goes out of his way to put the ball in my hands. This team needs a secondary playmaker, and it would be just like Finch. Instead of having it be Monte Morris or a backup point guard, what did he say today? And I don't think it was performative. He said, we need to figure out a second unit to put around Kyle. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's...
Oh, no, there's no doubt about the belief that Finch has him, and that Kyle Anderson acknowledges that belief he has in him. I think it was I do have some slow-mo clips here from that, but I think how I took it, and why I think we viewed what Slow-Mo's comments today,
everybody but me, right?
Yeah. Well, so what happened was, he talked at the beginning of his press conference, right, of whatever team I'll be on next season, right, if I'm here, those sort of things. And what that triggers in my head, as he was saying that through the first, as he said multiple times through the first 3 or 4 questions, is not necessarily that he doesn't want to come back here, or that he blames the organization for having what he called himself a shitty season.
Yeah.
But he's looking at, and has probably been shown, the limits to what the Wolves can spend on him, which naturally leads him to be like, well, I just need to look elsewhere so as to, maybe not be on a minimum contract, or to get more money, whatever that ends up being. So that set the foundation of what it was. But then you asked Kyle this question, and I don't mean this like in a bad way, but in ways the question was leading, of like Finch, like you and Finch.
What I basically said is he gets you.
Yeah. Well, I'll play the clip right here.
You're a unique player that needs to be kind of understood in a certain way. The fact that Finchy gets you so well, does that make a big difference? And will that make a big difference going forward, having somebody who knows how to use you?
For sure. I think a lot of coaches I've came across in my career, sometimes kind of don't know how to use me or don't know what to do with me. Finchy for as long as I've been here, Finchy put me in positions to be successful. He's trusted me with decision making, trusted me to play my game, allowed me to have the ball in my hands. That meant a lot to me, because I came across a lot of coaches who haven't let me do that. And, it kind of gets weird at that point. But Finchy and Tim have given me the utmost confidence, and put me in, the most position to succeed my 2 years here. So I'm very thankful for those guys. it's been really fun having the ball in my hands in the NBA. Like my old AAU coach called me yesterday and was like, this is like 20 years ago. Watching you with the ball in your hands is very special. So credit to Finchy and Tim. They've always put me in positions to succeed and allowed me to make decisions. That's just my game. That's what I do.
I'm glad we played that, Britt, because that is Kyle Anderson's press conference exit interview was very different than like Gordon Hayward's, if you saw that, where like Gordon Hayward was like, this was a disaster, I'm out of here. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so,
but he was speaking as somebody, this is what they've done for me.
Yes.
Rather than what they're doing. I mean, I get it. But again,
it is smart to
he's
bring up
not going to say, I'm coming back on the minimum,
Right. I'm going to do whatever to be.
But I do think put it this way, how much he loves to play as a central figure.
Sure.
And that if his kid had difficulty functioning in life in a way that, makes his kid unhappy and saps family energy, those are two things. If you can play the way you want to play and your kid is happy where he is, those are two big discounts. Mm-hmm. Those are two ways where you just go, I'm going to take less money to be here. And then you add to that most coaches, let alone, some coaches, the majority of coaches are not going to want his kind of performance on their roster. It's wonky, and it's if you have structure,
as he said, it gets weird.
Exactly, and it gets weird for him. That's the thing, And if it gets weird for them, then he doesn't play, And
we also know what are the times or what are the seasons where his playing time oscillated the most. It was the seasons when he was more so asked to play small forward rather than power forward.
Yeah, that was a great insight you came across. It was
nice that today it was acknowledged. And he acknowledged it a little bit at like the end of the season.
And
not all along.
Yeah.
No. At the beginning of the season, it was from him. Finch was like, Kyle's a basketball player.
Yeah.
All that, and maybe that was the belief going into it. But obviously, as a team, they ran into issues with Kyle at small forward, and Kyle said as much in his press conference today of like not being ready or able to be
and he also, in a great piece by Jace Frederick earlier this week, basically copped to what the dirty little secret that everybody speculated at, and he made it even more obvious by not wanting to comment on it, but he eventually did. Jace caught him at a good time, and he copped to it, and Jace dug up some footage of one of the plays he was exactly talking about, and so he had vision problems, and I think he's basically trying to again position himself, saying, I sucked for a while, no doubt, but there is a definite reason for it, and it's going away now. In other words, it's like I was injured,
right,
and I didn't want to let other people know I was injured because they would have exploited it, etc. I still have my problems with slow-mo, as anybody who follows me knows. It just drives me crazy that he'll get the ball right next to the basket and absolutely need to dribble out and look around. He can't just turn around and dump in a layup. And I don't know if that's part of his, thing, like maybe if he looks up quickly, or something, I don't know.
I think it's more of because that was pre-eye injury, some of it too. He's more of and I think
he wants
this is
to create.
he wants to create, and with I think players with like limited athletic ability find themselves more comfortable going north-south
and being
like down the floor. That's like the pull-up, that's the floater, that's those things that work for him. Whereas, when you don't have that,
you don't know who's
north-south, vertical north-south, then you start thinking about it and your inclination, or you're just
look around, make sure I don't get hosed from behind.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So I think he was, I think he had to learn and navigate a lot of that stuff. We should remember, like, the last chapter of this season, or maybe his last chapter of being with this team, was a good one.
Brilliant.
He in this Dallas series injected all the things we were talking about this team needing offensively, and I think like that's a bigger picture thing that you need to think about if you're Chris Finch or Tim Connolly. Is okay, if Kyle is a cap casualty this summer and you don't have him, well, you lose a pretty firm amount of that basketball intellect and all this stuff on the offensive side of the floor. Plus your next biggest, basketball IQ, control, understander of the game is 36 going on 37 years old in Mike Conley. Those two could potentially be out of here in, not that long of a time, or limited.
Well,
and so you need to replace that, I guess, is what I'm saying.
A significant hamstring strain, which is absolutely not only within the realm, but quasi likely to happen to Conley in the next 2 years, or some kind of thing where he just is out for 6 weeks. And
like a right soleus strain, maybe, of the Achilles.
Exactly. Yeah. And so if that happens and you don't have a backup, not only don't have a backup, but you don't have somebody who is in the business of instilling composure in excitable teammates.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't enough. Monte Morris is wonderful at the mechanics of installing composure out of chaos, but he's not the kind of guy that can go tell people, hey, it's time to calm down. It's time to do this. He hasn't been in the league for 17 years.
Right.
And so, yeah, I believe that, the Wolves have picked 27 and 37 in the draft. It would be inconceivable to me that they would not get a point guard with one of those two picks.
Or trading them to get a point guard. Yeah. Capital. That's the way to.
Yeah. But I think that Jalen Clark is fine. I think he's a combo guard. If he's a point guard, it will be something that
if anything, something that starts with that looks a lot like Josh.
He's a poor man's Monty Morris, to some extent.
I don't even think so. I think he's like
he's Josh Okogie, right?
Yeah, Josh Okogie. I think that's right. I mean, and excited to watch at Summer League. Like, we don't know. I mean, I watched his clips
right 12
months ago, and I've seen him take
we always will have his pre-game introduction to Walls, he was just fantastic in terms of just basically saying, I mean, it got to the point where I really honestly felt like we said, all right, MF, run through that wall.
He would have,
he would have given it a try.
That, and that's to the Kyle thing too. And again, and we viewed the press conference differently, but if we do go with the assumption that Kyle is out, there are some internal pieces in place that, could factor back into that. Is Josh Minot a 3 more than Kyle Anderson is or was, and does is he able to be put into that? Leonard Miller also, position, like is right. He part of the answer to that? And in a personal opinion, I don't think either of them are ready to impact or be a 8th man on
I'm actually worried. I'm actively worried about Josh Minot. I think he's too impatient. I think that I don't think he's going to be a good soldier for another season. And I'm not sure that he's got all kinds of talent. I mean, I saw him do a dunk in Dallas. It was like a 360 reverse dunk that was just phenomenal. Yeah. But again,
I get it from his perspective. I get it, right? So Memphis, he went to Memphis for his freshman year.
Yeah.
Right. And it was a whole messed up sort of year, like barely played there at all. Right. And that's when he's 19 years old.
Yep.
Comes to the Wolves at 19, 20 and doesn't play at all.
You're right.
Like, obviously flashes the athleticism and stuff like that. Last summer really works on his body. I mean, if people can't tell just from the sidelines, like, dude got a lot bigger. Like he's worked on his body. I think in many ways has, grown and matured from like just being the lawnmower, right?
Right.
Rev them up and let them go, to something more than that. But yeah, you are on a really good team. You were the 45th pick or whatever overall. You signed a 4-year contract, kind of with the idea that you would be incubating for a while. I would just say, like, I get the frustration of, for the last 3 years of his life, he really hasn't played basketball.
Right. And what excited me about him is he's one of those players that's in the right place at the right time, and you don't really know why. I mean, they call it a nose for the basketball,
Sure.
but it has a lot to do with just being disruptive. And again, we just got through talking about what this team needs is adherence to, some kind of thing where flow and structure are interchangeable.
You don't think Josh Minot's going to inject
Well,
that?
I mean, I think especially
he might give you some pace. He might give you some more chaos, like in a good way.
He is going to. He does when you see him in garbage time. He is going to try to wow people, and then he is going to deliberately try to show you how he blends in. You can almost see him thinking about how to showcase himself, and I don't know if you can get past that. Like I said, the frustration. I think he's just trying to figure out where he fits in, and where he fits in as a patient long-term piece. And I don't think he mentally fits in that way.
Well, it's just, that's like the interesting to him and Nas, same thing, right? The 4-year Goop to special contract, all that. Just Nas was on a terrible team, so he's playing year 1, playing a lot year 2. It's just the different, the different elements of that. That will conclude the Josh Minot portion of this of this podcast. This is welcome to the off season on the Dane Moore NBA podcast. We're gonna talk about random stuff. One other thing I had down that stood out to me from Conley's press conference, and just kind of the press conference today and this last month or so, is this idea that the team got more mature and have now been referred to as an emotionally mature team. And I think it can be two different things. I think the team got more mature, but is not yet an emotionally mature team. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I would. Although I will say that the lesson of Dallas makes me a little bit more empathetic to Conley, in that I thought Luka was going to come in and be a brat, and I think one of the things he was thinking about when he talked about maturity was, do they have an emotional maturity? Can they thrive under the bright lights? He kind of put those two things together. And what I did see is that Ant and Cat in particular, because they're the two biggest offenders of this, but when things began to matter, they stayed within themselves better. Not great, but Luka did it incredibly. I mean, Luka was the opposite of a brat. He was a guy, he needled the refs just enough probably to get a good whistle, but the refs were probably as surprised as anybody else that they weren't treated to the Luka tantrum show.
And that isn't the only thing, or at least it's not the only way in which I think we define emotional maturity. No. Emotional maturity is consistency, exactly. I think, and positive, consistency. And I think probably some people are sitting here being like, what, Britt? Luka wasn't bratty. He was, right? Like, some people think he was bratty.
It's a weird bar, but the Luka Doncic you and I know, right, is a Draymond Green in training. I mean, a guy who you're going, why in the world isn't he getting teed up right now?
Right.
And sure, he argues calls, but I'd say Ant, went at the refs almost as much as Luka did in the series,
Right.
And again, when you have the ball in your hands as much as those two guys do, and you realize the way the NBA operates today, SGA, Embiid. There is a cadre of people who are foul gatherers, who want to do their job in that aspect really well. But the smart ones, I think, when it comes to playoff time, you do not want to do that because the refs are far more likely to swallow their whistles in general, and that's the way it is. And you accept that. That's playoff basketball.
Yeah, so I think to the Wolves' emotional maturity and or lack thereof throughout the playoffs, like I do think the Phoenix series was an emotionally mature performance.
Absolutely.
From the Wolves. And if we left it there, I would agree with the sentiment that Conley repeated over and over today, which was we are now an emotionally mature team.
Right.
We did see emotional immaturity, not in the Denver series, pretty emotionally mature, I would say. But then it was when things went poorly in the Dallas series, they unraveled. Obviously Karl being a prime example of that. And it becomes weird to assess where Karl individually, his emotional maturity is at. I think it's definitely higher than it was last season or a couple seasons ago. But how do you weigh the idea that he was extremely emotionally mature in round one versus what happened in the Western Conference Finals there, right? Like,
right.
That was a factor, I think, in his underperforming in the round that they got eliminated.
Yeah, I think that what's happened is that people who watch a lot of NBA basketball, I mean, a lot of NBA basketball, the hardwood paroxysms, the guys who are just constantly on it, understand that there's a secret out there right now, and that is that the Dallas front court is for real. I mean, they are a really, really good group of people that will seal you out and make you mad at yourself.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, rattle you, right? Like
a lot. And
yeah,
they are extremely important. They are the reason. Two things I underestimated about Dallas was Kyrie's handle, was able to handle Ant and Na pretty easily, and that their front court was able to deter everybody but Slow-Mo. They bothered the hell out of Rudy. They bothered the hell out of Cat. They bothered the hell out of Nas most of the time, unless he was hitting threes. And I think that they're physical, they're role players. Jones Jr. is undrafted. The guy from Charlotte, whose name I always forget.
PJ Washington?
No. That's the other guy from Washington. Yeah, that's right. Anyway,
from Washington.
Yeah,
I don't even know where we're talking
I want to
about.
say Gatton, but it's
Gafford.
Gafford. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah, Danny Gatton. As a blues guitar player, of course. But essentially, you have these guys who are obviously not household names, and so mixed in with Lively, Sean Sweeney is a great defensive coach. He has been since the days in Milwaukee when he was fashioning a nascent Giannis, defense, and they were great. And he moved on. He's been with Kidd for a while, different incarnations. When he got those two guys and had Lively, they beat you up, and they beat you up with a coordination that camouflages the fact that they're really bruising you up, and that's not a good fit for Cat. And Cat was just busy coming off a series where he was like, he wasn't going to win Best Actor, he's going to win Best Supporting Actor, which is equally cool if you're an actor. That means you're a character actor, and that has a different skill set. So all of a sudden, Cat was in a bad movie when it came to Dallas. So the next thing you know, I think he lost his cool a little bit in terms of, and in the game, the game 5, Cat just decided he would look better and everything would be better. And miraculously, it was kind of true. But he just needed to start bowling his way to the basket regardless. And while that may have gotten some points, it was not great for rhythm and momentum. And he wasn't hitting his three yet again. So, I mean, he had one half of basketball in that series where he hit threes. And then the rest of the time he hit like 12%. So, you know.
Do you have time to do like 15 more minutes?
Sure.
Let's grab another quick break here to let people know. We've been letting you know about Adriana Lonick at Coldwell Banker all season. Today's show is brought to you by Adriana Lonick and Coldwell Banker. I can see up on the screen here, if you go to the dancingrealtor.com, Adriana and Coldwell have a promotion that if you book a strategy session, that you'll be entered to win some free Wolves tickets for next season. Obviously, that's a perk of contacting Adriana and working with her, but also for many of you, maybe you're even just considering entering the process of buying or selling a home, and you need someone to kind of guide you through that. And Adriana is a great option there. Again, you can get her information at thedancingrealtor.com to book a consultation. You can call or text her at 715-304-9920. Again, mention this podcast will be entered for those Timberwolves tickets. Her name is Adriana Lonick. She works with Coldwell Banker Realty. If you're considering the next steps in home ownership and don't know where to begin, go to thedancingrealtor.com. That's in the show notes below. Or if you're ready right now to contact Adriana, you can do so by calling or texting her again at 715-304-9920. But let's take this final segment, I guess, to just kind of reflect on the season as a whole. Kyle and I talked last night, and it was a lot of the energy that, you and I have had today, which is obviously after a loss. It's, why did you lose? Why is it not enough? What did not get you over the hump? And that's, I think those are fine conversations to have, particularly in this, in this moment, but they do overshadow getting here, in the first place. And, I think back to, me and you, maybe in September, October, and our expectations for this team. I think we were both at like 47 wins. Yeah,
46 to 48. And getting into the first round, and let's see what happens.
And that was a big undersell from us. And I even remember at the time, you kind of get caught up in the preseason and, things you're seeing things at practice, you're seeing the end, things are good. And always, like every season, I kind of come into training camp with an expectation. I always bump it up like a win or two, because you get caught in it. So I think like for me, I felt like that 47 win number was a somewhat optimistic, a somewhat glass half full. It wasn't full enough. This team had almost 10 more wins than that, and even that, I think, undersells how much faster this team kind of microwaved itself to another level. So just looking back at the season, what were some of the best parts of this, and what allowed the team to be in a situation here on May 31st to even have the opportunity to be here in the Western Conference Finals, saying,
well, the reason we've been muted in terms of the tone of how we've talked about this team is because we've been focusing on the offense, which is an underachieving offense relative to its talent. They are a defense that was historically good. It was John Schumann at NBA.com. I can't remember the exact stat right now, but he began to look at their net rating relative to the net rating, both the average and like 2, 3, 4.
Right.
And the Wolves had a dominance relative to the other teams that were playing the same kind of basketball. Because let's face it, the Wolves net rating compared to 5, 10, 15 years ago looks really high, because many more points are being scored. but relative to what all other defenses are coping with, this
Mhm.
is a dominant defense. This is a defense, and you could see it. That's the best part.
Right away.
Well, those back-to-back wins over Denver and Boston, that's when I wrote that giddy up
Oh, yeah.
column, and it was like, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I just couldn't believe that both of those teams are undefeated, and
That's totally where it shifted for me too.
as
Yeah.
late as April, the consensus was those were the teams that were going to be in the finals, and
Mhm.
so they just were the elite teams in the NBA, and the Wolves beat them. They did not
Mhm.
lose.
Yeah.
The opposing coaches were going, "Hey, we just lost to a really good team." I mean, everybody could see it, and what you could see was that Rudy was awakened out of Utah and going to be something
Right.
where he was going to help people, and his teammates were going to help him, and the trust was there almost from the jump. McDaniels was out for a while. Nah came in and was immediately a very good on-ball defender. I think Nah played in those games we're talking about against Denver
They
and
did.
Boston.
That was kind of his coming out
exactly.
party. Right.
And
Yeah.
Rudy was fantastic, and Ant was playing well. And what you saw was rotations that pre-anticipated things, and the coaching clearly, they expanded their staff pretty significantly and specialized on defense. Different players doing certain things, different coaches doing certain things, and that paid almost immediate dividends. Their transition was so much better. They were matching up, and if they weren't matching up, they knew why they weren't matching up,
Right.
and they were staying with their man and doing that, the right thing. They just had their they were ready to be a good defense, and they had a captain who, whatever you think of Rudy Gobert as a on-ball defender, and there are certain situations where he looks clumsy, it's funny that his biggest tormentor, Draymond Green, is so much like this. What Rudy does is talks an entire team through playing consistently energetic, intelligent defense. That's what Draymond does too. He says, "Get over there. I'm doing this. If I do this, you should be over there." Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. And the Wolves had players that bought in at some point in time, and they were just ready. And I mean, I will never forget Game 2 against Denver, and it was a demonstrably better defense without Rudy Gobert, I should add, than the game where they only allowed 70 points or 80 points or whatever it was in Game 6 to that same Denver team. They turned Jamal Murray into a frustrated ball of fuzz. It was, and Nikola Jokic was, had some marvelous games against it, and then had his shrug his shoulders, not going to do it this time games. That caliber of defense, as somebody who's grew up with the fabled Boston Celtics defenses and have always been a defensive guy, it was incredibly gratifying to me to watch team defense that went like 8 players deep. There were like 5 of the 8 players were really good on-ball defenders, and everybody knew how to rotate. Everybody was on a string. I mean, it was glorious, and I had so much fun. It was better than the Vando high wall years in which you had that, but you had specific people doing specific things that had a limited ceiling and a limited shelf life. And what you had here was a system that went 8 players deep and had a team-wide commitment to it. And, it was remarkable to go to games, and it was like a 3-week period where they throttled 2/3 of the teams they played in the third quarter. They'd come out at halftime and they just squish them like a bug. And it was, that's just, I won't forget that stuff.
Yeah, is it fair to say the Wolves won 15, 20 games with their defense alone this season?
Absolutely.
And I don't think in the previous 6 years to this that I've covered this team that they've won 15 to 20 games with their defense total, in that time. Maybe in the last 20 years.
Well, I mean, you could see teams that were playing bad offensively with them.
Mhm.
The opponent offense was having a bad game and they didn't mess that up.
Yeah.
It wasn't like the Charlotte game, the infamous Charlotte game.
Mhm.
But taking a team that came in playing good offense that started acting like, it's kind of like what Dallas did to the Wolves, quite frankly, for a recent memory, assuming your offense is going to flow and, oh, wait a minute, it's not, it's not going to flow. And watching teams adjust to that, especially the Clippers, all the Clipper games were fun that way.
Yeah, that's true.
Because the Clippers had so much ego invested because they're rightfully really confident in what they can do. And the Wolves just took them out of their shoes almost every time.
Right. It's one of my favorite things covering a team is watching someone or something develop that, that I didn't anticipate happening or even really see a path to doing that. And related to the defense, I thought it was really fun to watch Nas and Carl, both of them, do that over the course of this season. Two players in different ways that I've come to really appreciate their games over the past, 5 years for Nas or 8 years, for Carl. But to see them have an impact that I had never really seen before and add a new position, that's just that's the fun when you live in the weeds like we do every day, to watch those things come together and, and see Nas switching out onto twos and holding his own. And Carl too, we talked a lot about, okay, well, what if he has to chase players? What if he has to do some of these sort of things? I mean, I wouldn't say his defense was perfect by any means, but in almost every single element of Cat's defense greatly exceeded my expectations this season. And those things are always cool to watch.
Well, if you remember, my biggest reservation with the Gobert trade was how in the world are you going to have Cat play in space? And the system and the structure really helped that. But also Cat began to stop trying to play center in the half court, which helped. I mean, the fundamentals were so much more advanced is really the point here. And then if we're talking about, players who warm your heart, watching Nickeil Alexander basically wedge himself between the screener and his man. I mean, that's hard. I mean, even if you're successful at it, it's kind of like playing the limbo at breakneck speed or something. You know what I mean? I mean, you have to contort your body on the fly in a really interesting way. And you don't even get to congratulate yourself when you come through the other end. You have to keep guarding some guy who really plays well.
Totally.
And
like Kyrie Irving.
Exactly. So, he's got that, and also, I mean, as long as we're gushing, and I've said this before, it's a great locker room. They really like each other. They're good dudes. I had to tip my hat to Tim Connolly today and said, you walk your talk when it comes to character, because he said the words, and I thought, yeah, well, everybody says that, but he built a team of high functioning, good character guys, and I do think that made a difference in this team. I do think that the fact that Ant was able to let Carl know that he wasn't going to be the uncool kid in that locker room. He was going to be part of a group that rides together. That's That's cool. And
That stuff's fun to watch too, from our perspective, or kind of
Right.
watch watch a locker room develop. Like I don't know,
Rudy.
like a yeah, right, like a classroom in school where it's like the first day of
Right,
school,
right.
like here's who's in my class, and there's like the little cliques and stuff and all of that. And that was last season, right? And we
Right.
saw that pretty
Right.
blatantly, and to watch some of those things to the limited access and perspective that we've had. And granted, they know we're
Right.
the media and they know we're
Right.
around, but like I do think a lot of that stuff is genuine and organic, and it's just kind of a fun thing to measure in your head over the course of time, and be like, really see how good of friends Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels are, and how that
Right.
interplays with Ant, who
And how Ant wanted to be part of that. I mean,
Yeah.
he saw what Jaden and Naz, who worked out together like 3 summers in a row before Ant joined them,
Mhm.
he wanted to be in that vibe. And
Yep.
consequently, Jaden McDaniels, he knows that Naz does not need a push from Ant when it comes to positive reinforcement from
Sure.
the fan base. But Jaden McDaniels, he knows does, and
Yeah.
he gives it to him all the time. What makes it funny to me is we were talking, somebody mentioned Rudy to Slow-Mo, and he just went
today
invite,
at the-
he invited people up. Nobody went last year.
to the dinners. Yeah.
I mean, and that's so true. I mean,
Yeah.
I described him as like the stepfather,
Yeah.
and now, people were razzing him about his fashion choices. That's when I knew he was going to be all right there, because people were making fun of his clothing and that kind of stuff, because he is super serious, and you do want to kind of prickle him a little bit. But
And they do, but it's in like a way that like works.
Yeah, exactly.
now,
Well, I
and-
mean, because it's done with affection now, rather than they wouldn't do it before because they knew there would be a little bit too much edge to it. It would sound mean,
Right.
And Rudy, Rudy's not stupid. He understood exactly. We talk about Cat and his acceptance. Rudy saw that if he trusted his teammates on defense, they were going to give him the benefit of the doubt in the locker room and take what he said about defense a lot more seriously.
Right.
It was just, it's a great, long story short, it's a great chemistry that team has. And
Well, it was cool to watch Rudy kind of elevate into not being the new guy, but being the guy who has guys under him too. And, like those dinners, it just became apparent that that's what, you overhear that. And
exactly.
Rudy's like, we're going here. Like, I
Right.
think I was in Boston or something or earlier this season, and they're all laughing about how Leonard Miller got sick at dinner because he had like some beef tartare or whatever that Rudy made him have, and all that. And it's just like, that's when over the course of the season, you start believing in something being like a little bit, more special from a
Right.
really growing something and building something. Because I guess, at least for me, the majority of the locker rooms that I've been in over the 7 years that I've been in locker rooms here have not had that,
Yeah.
or maybe
They were cliques. They
Yeah.
they literally were 3 or 4 player cliques.
or just everybody was new.
Yeah.
It was like,
But I mean, even like,
here you go. Here's Jordan Bell,
right.
like,
but like Torian Prince.
Yeah.
It was a great locker room story, but Torian Prince had the subs,
mhm.
And so like the 4 or 5 guys who came off the bench would all gather in Torian Prince's room or something.
Yeah.
And that's a cool story, but it's also, hey, no starters were in that room. It's
Mhm.
like there is that dynamic. Whereas this year's Wolves team, you didn't hear a lot about, so-and-so and so-and-so are leaving. See you later. We'll see you tomorrow, or on the road, different people doing different things. So, and again, and it gets back to this whole Connolly thing, which I'm becoming an adherent of. You get a guy like Nikhil Alexander-Walker. We both commented on the fact that he's such a sincere, honest dude. He just wants to lay out the way human beings deal with each other in fairly graphic detail about how, hey, this guy's my brother, or I'm feeling this way about this right now. And very straightforwardly, and you just
and
see
at 24, 25 years old too.
and you just see how he fits in. You can see how a guy like Nikhil is, invaluable off the bench, breaks his neck on screens 50 times a game, and hits the three that looks like it shouldn't go in. And is a guy is just hanging out with his bro Mike Conley, and also there in the middle of the table at the dinners, probably
Right.
just not saying a lot but having fun.
This was fun, Brett. I mean, I said this to at the beginning of the show yesterday, but just for people who are new to the show, like, I mean, normally what has happened historically is the Wolves are out well in advance, and me and Britt or me and Kyle or whoever are
Well, looking at the draft.
popping on. Well, the draft, or we've even talked about the playoffs. Like I'm sure me and you will get on, sometime in the middle of the finals, to talk about that. I do plan on doing like kind of season capsules on like bigs, wings, and guards over the next week or so with different guests. But the cool thing about being on the beat is there's always kind of more stuff to dig into, and there will be with this team this summer, like you said, with the draft and free agency and all those things coming up. I mean, I got like 10 messages yesterday of like, Dane, can I see like the salary cap spreadsheet like up to I haven't looked into any of that stuff in like 2 months or whatever. So we'll dig into all that stuff too. But
and Conley did drop some breadcrumbs. Just very quickly, I think the news is relatively good on that. Conley made it sound like they're not afraid of a little debt right now.
Yeah. And I think, and just from conversations I've had over the, handful of months, is like, regardless of what ownership group it is,
right,
they're going to pay the luxury tax.
Yeah.
I think the question is, and maybe this does depend on
how long,
for how long and for how much for next season too. Because if it was Ballmer and blank check or whatever, then sign Kyle Anderson for $8 million that actually cost you $34 million or whatever. After all the taxes. But yeah, I don't. I guess I maybe wouldn't know either if something else was coming, but it did, from what they said publicly today. They acknowledged like the ramifications, but what Conley, the ramifications of the luxury tax and the second apron and stuff like that. But what Conley said is, we haven't had deal cycles through this second apron thing, which is, and I've talked over the course of the season a couple of other like cap people from other teams and stuff, and I've heard a similar sentiment of like, yeah, there are punitive things to this. Some of it is overrated, and some of it we don't know what the impacts are, because you need to kind of run through it and see how it does matter to some teams who don't have the ability to do anything more than the minimum contracts and stuff like that. And I would just say the biggest thing, and this was true with the luxury tax even before the second apron, is that it's okay to be in it for a little bit.
Yeah. Conley literally said that.
Exactly.
And I kind of liken it to like when people worry about the stock market crashing. And everybody should, that's terrible. But there are opportunities within those margins. And there's going to be opportunities in these crunches where maybe the Wolves will be forced to do something they don't want to do. But other teams may have a point guard that is beautiful for this squad. And I trust Conley and his staff to pounce on those opportunities.
I will. This is maybe my prediction. I think the Wolves will sign the best player they ever have for a minimum contract this summer. And that is, one, the team's good. That helps. Ring chasers, whatever. But two, just like economically, as I understand this, like a lot of the players. 5 to 7 million kind of players who are, salt, like a rotation guy, maybe might get compressed down to, Derek Jones Jr. like this year with Dallas. And that's the task at hand for Tim Connolly, Matt Lloyd, Del Dem, Sasha Gupta, the whole front office there is, to find that player. But there will be a more robust market for depressed salary players. I think that's a ramification.
Which to me is more interesting than who gets, the big name,
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess there's layers to what's relevant and interesting to this team, because this team very well could trade Karl-Anthony Towns. Like, that's not out of the realm of possibilities or some sort of big thing. But there's just different offseason conversations to have. There's, the cat and the big, those sort of ones. What does that look like? Trade machine, all that. But then once you are at this level, as I think we've kind of learned from Denver over the past few years, Dallas, Boston, it is a lot about, tweaking and finding players who fit into that seventh man role, or developing a Josh Minot type player into becoming a rotation player. So that stuff is going to be fun to track. But we're up here at almost an hour and a half. We'll have plenty more time to dig into all that stuff over the course of this summer. Britt, thank you for doing this today. Thank you for doing it all season, and we'll hear plenty more from you over the course of the summer. Just maybe not every single week on Thursday morning, but we'll more to come there. Just to listeners, I'm going out of town for the weekend, so I think the next episode might be like Tuesday evening that comes out. We'll start once I figure all that out, how to kind of start capsuling this season out positionally, but that'll be coming up next week. We're not going anywhere. And we'll keep rolling with this thing all the way through summer league. So until probably Tuesday afternoon, evening, he's Britt. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Grinning hard so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.